Okay, the second of Chapter 22 on the lymphatic and immune systems. We're going to talk about specific versus nonspecific resistance. So, specific resistance, I'm going to make a third video on that. It's immunity. Immunity is specific resistance. That means it's specific to an E. coli, or specific to a flu virus, or specific to a worm. The antigen that is inducing this immune reaction is specific. Remember, antigen we already covered in blood. Antigen is a marker, usually a protein, on the outside of a cell. It could be on the outside of a bacterial cell, a virus. It could be on the outside of one of your cells. So anyway, forget that for a minute. Let's go nonspecific resistance. We're going to talk about different examples coming up here. So let's go ahead and go into that. All right. So, physical barriers. Number one, skin. Mucous membrane. I mean, frankly, if you follow your skin across the cheek, outside cheek of your face and into your mouth, it becomes mucous membrane. It's the same thing as skin, except it's outside in, I guess you could say. So mucous membrane is skin, physical barriers. That's the first line of defense. Then you've also got some chemical barriers. Gastric juice, which is high acidity, salt in your sweat, lysozyme that's in your tears. In your notes on page 3, you've got a variety of things listed on a table where I try to give you a whole variety of different examples of these nonspecific resistance factors. You've got a lot of specialized antimicrobials like complement, interferon, interleukins, many of which are made by immune cells or phagocytic cells, but they are nonspecific. They're not for a particular microorganism. We'll talk more about inflammation coming up. We'll talk about phagocytes coming up. We'll talk about fever. But let me point out phagocytes. I got a nice picture here of some different ones, and let me just point some of these boys out. Okay, I got 4 listed over here. 2 of them are in red, neutrophils and monocytes. And I wanted you to remember that these guys are in blood. So here is a neutrophil, and here is a monocyte. Monocytes are huge guys. Those are the 2 professional phagocytic cells in your blood. They can come out of blood during inflammation to go into tissue that's been traumatized. Macrophages and dendritic cells are in non-blood tissues, particularly connective tissue, and this guy right here is a dendritic cell. You'll hear about him more. Here's a layout of the different cells involved in immunity. So we've talked a lot about these. Here are the neutrophils and the monocytes. Look at these 2 guys that derive from monocytes. These are out in tissues. You're going to hear much more about them coming up. Mast cells, you're going to hear about in inflammation, also involved in immunity. Same with their cousins, basophils. Mast cells are in connective tissue. I'll just put C-O-N-N and a T. Basophils are in blood. Eosinophils are in blood. These are the ones that are also associated with allergic reactions and also parasitic infections like worm and protozoan. And then in the third little video capture, we're going to talk about immunity, and you're going to hear much more about these B and T cells. Okay, I've already introduced you to cells, so I won't go over that again. This big guy right, whoops, I didn't want to do that. This big guy right over here is a macrophage. These are bacteria, by the way, that he's eating. Okay, so we're going to get into phagocytosis for just a second, and frankly, you've studied this already. It's not all that difficult to understand. You have some sort of thing here that's going to be eaten. It could be bacteria, it could be viral, it could be a wooden splinter, it doesn't matter. And you've got a phagocytic cell right over there. Remember those 4 that I just mentioned. So the first thing that happens is phagocytic cell attaches to, makes contact with the thing that it's going to ingest. It then forms a kind of a phagocytic cytoplasmic surround sound around the microorganism or whatever, and that's endocytosis. And so the organism comes into the cell and it forms a vacuole. It's called a vagosome. So the organisms are inside this vacuole. Notice this guy right here, lysosome. And inside of him, remember, he's got lysozyme. It's an enzyme, antibacterial. So these 2 guys, this and this, come together, and the lysozyme is dumped into that phagosome, and it destroys the microorganism, and then you have exocytosis right over there. So that's phagocytosis. Macrophages and dendritic cells are key players here. And let me just point out, let's start at 12 o'clock on a clock. So you see these are locations where you have a lot of macrophages and dendritic cells. In the brain, in 2401, you studied glial cells, and one of them was microglia. These are phagocytic cells. They're a type of dendritic cell in the brain. You've got them in the lungs, got them in the spleen, got them in the liver, got them in lymph nodes. They're all over the place. Dendritic cells are by far and away the most prolific of these phagocytic cells. Remember, these guys are outside of blood. That's where they hang out. Okay, so let's move over to inflammation. And before we get into that, let me point out, if I can get there, there's a wonderful site called Khan Academy. I think his name is Saul Khan, and he's made hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of really good videos, all different kinds of topics. I think it's mainly made for high school. But you'll notice, let's see, let me go over here, that I am in the area of science. I mean, I could have picked math instead, but why? And there are 2 areas you might want to think about. I'm in biology right now, but there's also an area in science called health and medicine. And in this particular one, there's a really nice little layout of inflammation, which we're going to get into right now. Let me get back over to PowerPoint. Okay. Alrighty. Alright, so let me set this up. We have a situation. This happens to be a wood splinter right here. Goes into the body. That's the epidermis. Oops, let me get rid of that bar. That's the epidermis right there. And this is the dermis, connective tissue, right there. And remember, and of course the splinter comes in and it starts to do damage to the cells in the dermis. And remember that one of the cells in the dermis is a mast cell. You covered that in skin, back in, and actual connective tissue in 2401. Mast cells are the cousins, very close cousins of basophils. They're out here, and the injured cells start to release chemicals. I'm going to make little red dots here. These are chemicals. Now these chemicals start to attract cells to the area, like chemical SOSs. Now notice that there's a blood vessel right here, and there are white blood cells moving out into the area. So all these white blood cells congregate in this area. Now, the little red molecules that I just mentioned, these are called chemical mediators, and there are a lot of them. And let me just point out some. Here's a bunch of them right here. It's like almost a dozen. But the main one I want to mention is histamine. But there are other ones in addition to histamine. So let me get back to that view. I can't get back there. Oh, wrong way. Okay. All right, now let me set you up on this situation down here. All right, so in the first frame, you got damage to the tissue. Look at these blood vessels right here. Let's say, look at that diameter of that blood vessel. Now, second frame, look at that diameter of same vessel. You'll notice it's gotten bigger. Vasodilation. The vessel gets larger. Histamine does that, in addition to some of the other chemicals. By the way, these chemicals, again, are released by mast cells, cells that have died in the area, or white blood cells that are moving into the area. Okay, there's another thing that histamine does. It makes the blood vessel leaky. So let me go to the next shot. All right. So right here you see a wall of a blood vessel. All right. And here is the other end of the blood vessel. There's blood inside of here. And of course this is the traumatized tissue out there. So what's going to happen is in between these squamous cells, remember, capillaries, squamous cells right there, they have gaps. You can see one right there where the cells meet. Histamine increases the gap size between the cells. So the cells are not as tightly touching each other. In other words, increased vessel permeability. Now this means that the white blood cells can more easily move out. That's called diapedesis, by the way. But there's something else that's going to go out with white cells, and that is plasma. So there's plasma here inside of the blood, and these blood vessels now become leaky to plasma, and plasma now leaks out here. And of course you can see the relationship with edema, I'm hoping. So the two functions of trying to get, back up. The two functions of histamine are vasodilation and increased blood vessel permeability. Vasodilation obviously increases blood flow to the area, which you need because you want more oxygen and nutrients and so on for repair. But it also makes the area very red and warm to the touch because blood carries heat. The vessel permeability increases the plasma leakage, which causes the edema, and also contributes to the uncomfortable feeling when you get that swelling because it increases pressure in the area. One more thing I want to mention on that little shot right here. I mentioned diapedesis. Look at the word chemotaxis. Those chemicals that are produced out in the damaged tissue draw white cells. They're, again, kind of like chemical SOSs to bring cells into the area. It's called chemotaxis. Again, a look at different kinds of chemicals that are involved. There are a lot of them. But again, histamine is the only one I wanted to mention. And of course, that I wanted to mention that because I'm sure probably most of you have antihistamines at home. This picture that you see here is a mast cell, which is again comparable to a basophil in the blood. And those blue granules, because when you look at them on a histology slide, they're very deeply blue granule-like. Those granules are full of histamine and other chemicals. And I think I may have had a picture. Yeah, right over here. Look at the bottom right. You'll see a cell with dark blue granules. That's a basophil. Again, a mast cell would be comparable to that. Okay, so here's a look again at a step-by-step of inflammation. I'm not going to go over it. I've kind of paraphrased it already, but you can stop here and look at it in more detail. Okay, so I've already mentioned this too. Woo, let me go back. All right, so trying to get the thing here. All right, so here are the 4 symptoms of inflammation. Erythema, red, eryth, like erythrocyte. Wherever you have more blood flow, it's going to be red. Wherever you have more blood flow, there's going to be more heat being carried. By the way, this is not the same thing as fever. Not. We'll talk about fever in a minute. The other thing that histamine does is it increases vessel permeability, so you get more plasma leakage out into the tissue, more interstitial fluid, which remember is going to become lymph. That's called edema. And then fourth, you've got pain. A couple of reasons. Number one, when there's a lot of fluid accumulation, it causes a great deal of discomfort because it's very tight and high pressure sets the pain receptors off. And some of those chemicals that I listed on the previous slide are mediators of pain. So here's a picture from your book going through the different symptoms of pain and how they occur. And notice right in the middle of the slide is a mast cell releasing histamine and heparin. Heparin's an anticoagulant. And again, mast cells, basophils in blood, mast cells in connective tissue. Okay. Fever, sometimes called the fifth symptom of inflammation. It is not the same thing as just regular heat. Oops, didn't mean to do that. All right. So, you see the word in the middle called pyrogens. Pyro means fire, like a pyromaniac sets fires. Pyrotechnics means firecrackers. Your tissues, when they're dying, can release pyrogens. Microorganisms can produce chemicals that are pyrogens. Your immune system can release chemicals that are pyrogens. They can come from a variety of places. They get to the brain. And remember, in the brain, you've got an area called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is the regulator for body temperature. So when pyrogens are around, the hypothalamus resets body temperature up. In other words, it tells muscles to contract. And when muscles contract, you get shivering, and of course, muscle contraction produces a lot of heat, and it starts getting your body temperature back up again to whatever fever. Now, we're not talking about a big fever. Fever is protective, by the way. At about 101 degrees Celsius, it helps your immune system. It's good for inflammation. It enhances phagocytosis. So I'm not talking about 105 degrees where it fries your brain. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and we'll pick up with the third part of this on immunity in the next little video.